Good morning and welcome to the annual Salute to Veterans, sponsored by the Gunner Mountain Chapter, NSDAR, and KDS DAR School. Please stand for the presentation of colors and remain standing through the patriotic exercises. KDS Senior and Gunner Mountain Society CAR President Alex Wren will give the invocation.
Please bow your heads and pray with me. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to be here to thank and memorialize these veterans. Thank you for giving them the strength, courage, and wisdom to fight for our country and keep us safe. Please pass on these traits to our active military members as they are out serving. And Lord, please keep everyone safe as they return home to their families. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States will be led by Jonah Sutton, member of the Gunner Mountain Society, CAR.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The national anthem will be led by Jessica Krill, Director, KDS DAR School Band and Choir.
Please join me in the national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in there, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please post the colors. You may be seated. I am Larry Bolin, principal of KDS DAR High School, and it is my honor to welcome each of you here today. I want to say a special word of welcome to the veterans with us today, and I want to thank you for all your patience as we had to reschedule this program because of a high rate of flu cases within the school. Veterans Day is a time for us to pay our respects to those who have served. Today and every day, we stand united in respect for you, our veterans. This holiday started as a day to reflect upon the heroism of those who died in our country's service and was originally called Armistice Day. It fell on November 11th because that is the anniversary of the signing of armistice that ended World War I, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. However, in 1954, the holiday's name was changed to Veterans Day in order to encompass honoring all veterans in all wars. We celebrate and honor Americans' veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. And I am pleased we are able to share this event with our students so that they may gain a greater understanding of the service and sacrifice of our nation's veterans. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ms. Heather Green, Executive Director, KDS DAR School, who will introduce our guest.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. Good morning. On behalf of the Kate Duncan Smith DAR School Board of Trustees, it is my pleasure to welcome each of you here today as we honor our nation's veterans. Since 1924, the mission of KDS has been to educate the children of this community with an emphasis on patriotism. And I can think of no better example of that than to celebrate those men and women who served in our armed forces and fought to ensure our freedom. The Gunner Mountain chapter in SDAR is pleased to co-host this event with the school in an effort to not only honor the service and sacrifice of our veterans, but to instill in our students a sense of patriotism and respect for those brave few who have supported the cause of freedom throughout the world. 0.4% of our country's population serves in the military. And as we consider the impact those individuals have had on the world, defending our freedoms and protecting democracy, I'm reminded of the words of Winston Churchill, who said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Let us never forget or take for granted what we owe to the few." I'm excited to share that the Gunter Mountain chapter has received approval to have Free Home Cemetery here in Grant be an official Wreaths Across America site. With more than 220 veterans interred at Free Home Cemetery, it is the perfect local site to be a Wreaths Across America partner. In 2021, 2.4 million veterans wreaths were placed across the country at 3,137 participating locations. More than 2 million volunteers helped place wreaths, and a third of those were children. Our chapter is asking individuals and organizations to sponsor wreaths so that the service members who are buried at Free Home can be honored on National Wreaths Across America Day on December 17th. Today is the deadline to sponsor wreaths, so no hurry. But if you are interested in sponsoring one, there are flyers out on the registration table, or you can make a donation by cash or check following the program. It is $15 to sponsor a wreath. It is now my pleasure to introduce Cheryl Harrison, Chair, KDS DAR School Board of Trustees. Mrs. Harrison, would you like to bring greetings?
Thank you, Ms. Green. It is an honor to represent the KDS DAR School Board of Trustees this morning. We are so thankful and grateful for KDS staff and faculty for continuing to emphasize patriotism in their school program. And we're also thankful to Gunter Mountain for helping to co-host this event today. But most of all, we are thankful for you veterans. We are grateful for your service to our country, and we will always remember what you have done for us, for those of you who are here today and those who were unable to be with us. May God bless you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Other special guests with us today are Rita Horton, Honorary Chair, KDS DAR School Board of Trustees. Mindy Kameyer, Past Reporter General in SDAR. Mrs. Kameyer is our speaker and will be introduced further a little later in the program. Sherry Spurlin, Treasurer, Alabama Society DAR. Ricky Watson, Marshall County Commissioner, District 2. And Colonel Brian Neuer, President, Marshall County Board of Education. Thank you all for being here today. But our honored guests today are our veterans. If you are a veteran or a member of the military currently serving our country, would you please stand at this time? You have our deep appreciation. Thank you. And now our high school band is going to play a patriotic selection for us. Thank you, Mrs. Creel, and your students. Our speaker today is Mindy Kameyer. Mindy Tidmore Kameyer became a devoted member of the KDS DAR School Board of Trustees in 1989 when President General Marie Yoakum selected her as the NSDAR Junior Membership Committee Chair. She has been a faithful member of the KDS Board ever since. Mindy is a 52-year member of the DAR and has served her chapters, her state, and the National Society in many capacities, including serving as Reporter General from 2013 to 2016. She holds an outstanding record as chair of 9 national committees. And of course, we best remember her exemplary service as National DAR School Chair from 2004 to 2007. Mindy is here today to talk with us about her experiences years before her involvement with the DAR. She has a unique perspective on war as a civilian and will share the story of her years as a stewardess, flying soldiers into and out of Vietnam. As a 4th-generation DAR member, Mindy laughs when remembering that she initially refused to join the DAR for many years. But her years of flying with soldiers taught her about patriotism and inspired her to join the DAR to continue honoring our military service men and women. Please join me in welcoming from Atlanta, Georgia, Mindy Kameyer.
Thank you, Mrs. Green. It is so wonderful to be with you, and I'm sorry I'm talking to y'all. You have to look at my back, but anyway, we will work with that. And I am very, very happy to be with you because I want to tell you some stories. I feel that every single one of us has stories that you have made during your life. I am not a veteran, though I did have some very unique experiences with the military several times, and they became a part of my life story. And I am one of those DAR ladies that you see every October and May for graduation. I love coming up here from Atlanta. It's always scheduled into my life every single year. You know, you probably don't think of us DAR ladies as anything but the ones who come up here all dressed up to see you. But you know, we are mothers and grandmothers. Some are professional women, and all admire KDS DAR School. We are here because we want to be, and my hope is that you appreciate the education that you receive here. Now, I'm not just talking about learning from books, but the way KDS DAR School strives to teach each and every one of you to be good citizens. I was raised in South Texas in a very small town right on the border, very much like Grant. We moved many times, but I was lucky enough to have a grandmother that I could spend time with every summer. As my story begins, think of me as this young woman who dreamed of being part of something larger than that life I had down in South Texas. And boy, did I ever find it over the Pacific Ocean, sealed in an airplane with 164 brave young men facing an unknown year as they traveled to Vietnam. And then more uncertainty as they traveled home to confront many who thought they were wrong to fight. But I say they were right. They were the ones who bravely defended that country, Vietnam, and answered a call to service. They are the ones that we should thank every day. Now, I'm very proud that I have 18 Revolutionary soldiers, but many of my other family members have served. My grandfather fought in World War I in France. My uncle fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. And my godfather, my dear godfather, was an original Flying Tiger and a double ace in World War II. My 100-year-old stepmother is a Marine. You know the saying, once a Marine, always a Marine. She served in World War II. And then, after the war, she became a stewardess, and she flew Bob Hope all over the United States on many of his military trips. My brother, a Green Beret, served in Vietnam as an Army helicopter pilot for 3 tours, but he lost his life because of Agent Orange. My husband, Brian's son, is a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, having served in Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And my father flew F-4F Wildcats in the Pacific during World War II. My late husband was a Navy pilot who served in Vietnam, and my son is a Navy commander and pilot, having served 3 tours in Iraq. That's 3 generations of naval aviators in my family, father, son, and husband. The Tidmore-Kammeyer clan are all military proud. Now, one of my favorite pieces of military memorabilia is the Red Cross uniform that my grandmother wore during World War II. There are really too many of her stories to tell you today about her volunteer service, because it was right down there on the border, but because her Spanish was excellent, her duties were to visit the farmers out in the country and deliver the dreaded telegrams. The only complaint I ever heard from her was that the chickens were always pecking on her ankles. But I know that she was a comfort to many people. She is the one who taught me how important it is to be a volunteer, and her lessons have led me throughout my life. Now, as a young woman, I decided I wanted that career as a stewardess. Now, back then, a stewardess is what now called a flight attendant. I joined Continental Airlines in 1966. The next year, I volunteered to fly our MAC flights, MAC, Military Airlift Command flights, to Vietnam. For the next 5.5 years, I flew to Saigon, Da Nang, and Cam Ranh Bay. I had no idea what an impact these years would have on my life. Truly, this was a thrilling, challenging, and also heartwarming experience. 2.6 million men and women served in Vietnam. I have figured out in those 5.5 years, I flew at least 175,000 men to Vietnam, but more importantly, I got to fly them home and on R&R trips. Our layovers back then were in Honolulu, Clark Air Base in the Philippines, Okinawa, Guam, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and before 1969, we even had layovers in Saigon. We also fueled in Taiwan and Wake Island. Now, if you ever think about going on a trip to the South Pacific, you don't need to land in Wake Island. No. This is a heady time for a young and adventurous woman from South Texas. Remember, I told you there were 164 Marines on those airplanes. It was quite wonderful. But speaking of Marines, I have only had to evacuate 1 airplane in my over 40 years of flying. The number 4 engine on our airplane exploded on takeoff out of Guam. The captain told me to prepare for an emergency landing. They dumped fuel, went around, and we landed on a foamed runway. I opened the forward door and began our evacuation. Just like those years, many years ago and today, it's always, come this way, jump, jump, come this way, come this way. I began yelling at those Marines. But I promise you, it was quite an experience, because as those young men were jumping into the slide, every one of them stopped and said, "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. That's a Marine for you." And it was a very successful evacuation. If you ever become a stewardess or a steward, and then you have to evacuate, you want Marines on board. We were stews, and we lived in a very special bubble because we all knew each other, we flew with each other, and as flying to Vietnam, we had second lieutenant designations. Not sure what this would help us with if anything happened, but that's what we had. Young people were becoming protesters, though, back in the United States, and many chose the Vietnam War to protest. It is estimated that 40,000 men resisted the draft and went to Canada. Some estimate that this number is twice the size. But I remember so well the young men on returning flights. They were asking us what it was like at home. I did not know how bad it could be for them individually. Should they wear civilian clothes on the airplane going home? Would they be ridiculed? Would they be spit upon? Would people laugh at them? I couldn't tell them these things, but I did my best to make their trip home wonderful. We said thank you to each one of them. We did our very best to play games. We played poker. They taught me how. I learned how to play the poker, and we decorated the planes for all the holidays. We handed out stationery going over and envelopes. And I tell you, I guarded a lot of letters and brought back to the United States to give to mail. It was important to reassure these young men that they had supporters at home. Now, many of our flights would land in El Toro, California, which was the Marine Corps Air Station. It never mattered what time of day or night we landed. There was always a group of men and women there with fresh coffee and homemade cookies. They wanted to greet our soldiers, and they had a mission to be their own welcome home committee. I found that they were VFW, Rotary clubs, church groups, and yes, DAR chapters. All were volunteers. All wanted to do something very positive for these soldiers. Did you know, many of the DAR ladies probably don't know this even, that the 26th DAR President General, Adele Sullivan, visited Vietnam in 1968 on the invitation of General Westmoreland. She established the DAR Service for Veteran Patients after this historic visit. My brother was honored to fly Martha Wright during one of her many trips to Vietnam. She was a full bird colonel in the United States Army Reserves and wore the Green Beret just as my brother did. She was really beloved by the soldiers. There were women serving in Vietnam, the most incredible nurses I have ever met. They worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, in the steamy hot hospitals under unbelievable circumstances. Each one was really an angel. They worked so hard to bring those men back to health. And then on their day off, you would probably find them at an orphanage assisting with vaccination or teaching hygiene. Or you might find them right back in the hospital, talking to the soldiers, writing letters from them, and reading to them. I really did consider them angels. I even met some soldiers who found and saved abandoned children in the fields. The Marine pictured with me here found this little girl alone in the jungle and took her back to an orphanage. He told me he went back and forth to check on her, and after a while he decided he was going to adopt her. But that takes a very long time. He volunteered for 2 more years in Vietnam so he could keep track of her. On this day, he was bringing her back to America. Even though the military was an understood part of my family background, many times I have wondered just when patriotism became very important to me. I've had to remember a very special flight. One afternoon I was called out to a trip. I'd been anxiously watching TV and I didn't want to take the trip, but I always had a packed suitcase ready, so I grabbed it and off I went. Halfway to Honolulu, the captain made a following announcement and said, "The Eagle has landed." It was July 20th, 1969, and we had landed on the moon. Apollo 11 was a success. I was very interested in this whole process and very disappointed to be out flying, but that changed. I was working in the galley at the time, and I expected a roar from the Marines on board when the announcement was made. But you know, it was very quiet. And then I watched a master sergeant put his meal on the floor, stood, and began singing. Slowly and reverently, all of the other Marines did the same thing. They began singing along. That Boeing 707 was filled with the beautiful young male voices singing God Bless America, America the Beautiful, the national anthem, and of course, the Marine hymn. There's just no way I can express the feeling of pride in my country at that moment and pride in these young men on that airplane. But I found out it was only the beginning. Arriving at Honolulu, we went to our hotel, and everyone was gathered around the TV. Do you know we didn't even have TVs in our room back then? Can you imagine? There was so much shouting and high-fives going on. No one wanted to go to bed. Then on our layover, we took the next flight went to Tokyo. On the layover there, it was amazing. We were walking out shopping and doing things. All of the locals came up to us. They wanted to say thank you. They wanted to talk to us. We couldn't buy any dinner, we couldn't buy drinks, anything. They wanted to be close to us. There was a great feeling of excitement and happiness for the United States everywhere we went on this overseas trip. Again, I felt a lot of pride. There was a moment of patriotism and pride in my country that I felt then. To this day, some 50 years later, I still remember those amazing soldiers as they stood so tall. They were so proud, and they sang about our country, even as they were flying off to a foreign country. They were patriots. They answered the call to serve. They left their homes and families. They put off careers and all the fun times of youth. They fought in jungles, the likes none had seen before. But like their fathers and grandfathers, even going back to the American Revolution, they served the country because it was asked of them and they wanted to do it. Now, we had many night flights, especially into Da Nang. It was a major Air Force, Army, and Marine base. The troops were coming in and out of it every single day. As we would approach this active air base, there was always a lull in the conversation, of course. Now, our landings there were quite an experience. We flew in really high and then dove for the runway. We usually landed under cover of darkness. All the shades were pulled down, the lights were off. This was pretty scary. I tried to ignore the danger, though, but many times there would be shelling, and it was really scary. One night we landed, deplaned our Marines, and immediately the shelling at the base began. I had kicked off my shoes because we were cleaning the airplane for a turnaround back to Okinawa, and 4 Air Force men ran up the stairs. We looked back, they grabbed us and literally threw us over their shoulders and took us down the steps, down across the tarmac, and tossed us into a bunker. Needless to say, the heavily armed Marines in the bunker thought they were very lucky. "Look what just came down from heaven," one of the Marines said, and another said, "Well, I guess this ain't so bad, is it?" Telling our captain about it later, I said I was really scared because I thought there might be snakes in the bunker. He said I should have been afraid of the Marines. No, they were perfect gentlemen, and they protected us. After we were cleared and sent back to the airplane, the captain was ordered by the tower to take off immediately in the lull of shelling. He refused. "I am the captain of this airplane, and I am not leaving until it is filled with Marines returning home. That was the fastest boarding you have ever seen in your life, and we left with every seat filled. Now, during those years, life went on. There were more flights. I met more young men on these airplanes, brought more young men home. But by 1971, I knew that things had changed on our flights. It was a difficult time in the United States. Even the honorable Marines were talking down the war and asking why they really had to go. Drugs had become a real problem. We asked for and received proper training on how to take care of the guys as they came down off of drugs on these very long flights home. We never shook a man awake because he would probably hit us. And the soldiers were all searched for drugs before boarding the airplane. As crew members, we were probably staying up too late, partying a bit more, and that was not good for us either. And at that time in '71, we finally began bringing soldiers home in the belly of the plane. The flag-draped coffins lined the tarmac. This was something that MAC flights had not done before. It was disturbing, and of course it was very sad. We knew the escorts because they were dressed in khakis, not fatigues. Finally, there was a time when I was talking to a young escort, and he told me about his best friend from middle school, who he was bringing home. After sitting with him for several minutes, I went to the cockpit, and I just cried my eyes out. The captain turned to me and said, "Mindy, how long have you been flying MAC?" I said, over 5 years. He said, "Mindy, you need to go home. You need to fly a domestic schedule. 5 years is just too much time with these boys." I took his advice then in 1971, and I bit off MAC, but I never forgot the boys. 56,000 young men and women died in Vietnam. The Memorial Wall in D.C. is a heartbreaking place, as all 56,000 names of those killed are inscribed there. When I go to D.C. every year for our Continental Congress, I always visit the Vietnam Wall. While there, I can't help but think and wonder about the names on that wall, if any of them might have been on a flight with me. It always makes me so sad, but I am also happy that I can have the chance to visit this wall and this remarkable place for those fallen men and women. We celebrated Veterans Day a couple of weeks ago on November 11th. On that day, we recognize all who served in the military and peacetime. I am so thankful for those men and women. The United States 50th Anniversary Commemorative Commission of the Vietnam War is making sure that the men and women of Vietnam are being properly thanked and appreciated for their service. The DAR has 2,000 chapters as commemorative partners. Every state is a partner. We have sponsored over 6,000 events that recognize over 310,000 Vietnam veterans. I appreciate how my DAR sisters continue to honor veterans and the Vietnam War and all veterans. Speaking of all veterans, here is another of my stories. Many of you know that Tom Brokaw wrote a wonderful book, The Greatest Generation, about those who defended America in World War II. If you haven't read that book, you are certainly old enough to read it, The Greatest Generation. I hope you will. But he also has said that the generation today is strong and they are committed to defend this country. I'm reminded of that when I attend your KDS graduation and see so many of your friends volunteering for a branch of the service. Now, as a mother, it was incredibly hard to see my son off to Iraq and the war. Like generations of other mothers, I prayed for him and his crew every single day. I remember it was like yesterday as his sister and I watched him circle his helicopter over our heads, heading off to the ship that would take him away from us. And then in 2006, I had an opportunity to visit Lonsdale Regional Medical Hospital in Germany with then President General Presley Wagner. We were very proud at that moment to present a $25,000 check, the first of many, to the chaplain's closet. Project Patriot Committee paid for this. All funds donated by DAR daughters. After presenting the check, an alarm went off, and the chaplain said to us, a medevac from Iraq has just landed. Do you want to see what we do here? The soldiers injured in Iraq were taken directly from the battlefield to Lonsdale at that time. Way back in Vietnam, I would visit the hospital at Cam Ranh Bay along with the other stews from my flights, and we were a novelty. We were cute and young, and we were American. But this was so different. My son was flying in Iraq. I didn't know how I could possibly comfort soldiers in a military hospital knowing that he was still in harm's way. Then I remembered many times I have read the words in the Bible calling us to bring comfort, and he will be with you. I said to myself, Philippians 4, verse 13, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. I knew I was supposed to be there at that moment. I stood in a corridor as personnel prepared with the precision of a well-rehearsed drill to welcome home a transport of wounded soldiers. I stood trembling in the cold as one by one our wounded soldiers were ever so gently lifted off the medevac bus and brought into the hospital. I watched as the chaplains were the first to grasp the hand of a soldier and tell him that it was safe now, he was okay, and he would be receiving the best of medical care. I watched as the liaison officer greeted the soldier next and told him that he was his new best friend, because these officers were assigned to help a warrior be stabilized, call home, and do all of the paperwork. I watched this incredible medical team in action as they saved the lives of our soldiers in Iraq. The medical teams called these soldiers wounded warriors. It was the first time I had ever heard the words, and there I was with them. I held the hand of a young man who had lost an eye and was covered with shrapnel wounds. He said he was going home soon. I said, well, that's good. You have done your job, and you will heal better when you're with your family. And then he said to me, ma'am, I had to leave my men. I'm worried about them. I could only tell him that I was sure his men were worried about him too, but now his job was to get well. Another wounded warrior said he told his mother not to fly to Germany as he would be home soon, and his voice was so tough. But I noticed how tightly he held onto my hand. I was his substitute mother in a time of need. Another warrior heard that I was with the DAR and took off to his room and returned with his DAR calling card. Now, the DAR sent hundreds of these cards to Iraq and Lonsdale. This young man told me he had used his card to call his mother every morning from the hospital to assure her that he had made it through the night. This is another visual sign of the good work DAR Project Patriot Committee does. Here was a generation of young men and women who had volunteered to go to war, giving up all they had at home, but they knew in their hearts that what they had chosen was the right thing to do. Lonsdale Hospital was just the first stop for these wounded warriors. You hear about them on TV. Many continue to have a long cooperation and years of therapy. There will be scars on their bodies as well as their hearts, and we need to let them know that we will not forget them. Again, as in Vietnam, many men and women died in Iraq, but I was such a lucky mother to welcome home my son 3 times. And on 9/11, I was living in New York City. This is another story. 4 days after the attacks, I put on my flight attendant uniform and worked again as a volunteer this time, one of the very first flights out of LaGuardia Airport. Now that was an emotional day. We were greeted at the airport with applause. The captain held a huge American flag outside his window until the very last moment of takeoff. Then in Dallas, we were met with an even larger American flag held on the tarmac by our ground crew. We were proud to be on that flight to show the resilience of Americans. No one was going to harm us again. Now, each of you know how impressive our American symbols are. We have our American flag, the Liberty Bell, the American bald eagle. But did you know that in 1782, this bird, native to and found only in North America, became a symbol for all this country stands for? The freedom, because it flies high and free over our country. Strength, because it is so powerful. And majesty, because it shows that clear, majestic beauty of our country. I love this verse from Isaiah. Those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar like wings of eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Our military men and women soar like eagles to protect and defend always our country, and they will never stop. They gave us our freedom and our country in the American Revolution, but they are tested again and again on battlefields around the world to preserve that freedom that we enjoy. Last March, I watched my 100-year-old now stepmother at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. She unveiled a plaque dedicated to 690 women Marines, the first women ever to be on that base. I watched as she stood so tall and straight as the colors were presented. I'm sure she was thinking of when she was one of those 690 women. I had tears rolling down my cheeks for this woman who changed her life in 1942 to serve her country. This was another incredible story and a part of my life. And now I thank each of you who served in the military, and also those who supported one who did. I also thank each of you patriots who serve your country every day by loving it and respecting all it stands for. I know KDS symbol is the patriot. Perhaps your patriots will mean more to you now, because without patriots back home, all of our brave soldiers would be alone. Let's remember all those who fought for us and promise that they will not be forgotten by the DAR, by you here in Grant, Alabama. DAR daughters and KDS students, you are all military proud. The KDS DAR school patriotism is not taught, but it's lived every single day. Perhaps that's why I love this school so much. Bless you, and thank you for all you do. Daughters, KDS students, citizens of Grant, and our veterans, what you do and have done for our active and retired military men and women, I appreciate from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kmeyer. As our high school choir performs the Armed Forces Salute, we invite you to stand when the song of your branch of service is played. Our Family and Consumer Sciences Department, led by Ms. Liz Clark, has prepared a brunch today for our guests. Students, please remain seated as our guests exit the gym. Thank you to each of you for being here today. May God bless each of you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.